They're quite terrified of a progressive left that is actually putting forward real truths about why neoliberal economic policies don't work.
Everyone should have health care, universal health care, Medicare for all. Everyone should have free college.
We didn't start off as a democracy. We started off as a slave republic of white male property owners. Democracy in America is always either shrinking and shriveling away or it's expanding and growing.
I'm Anthony Barnett, co-founder of Open Democracy, and I was recently in Washington, D.C., speaking with U.S. progressives, including 3 leading Democratic Party politicians.
I now serve as the sole chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
I was the co-chair of Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign.
I was tasked with leading the impeachment effort against Donald Trump.
My aim was to explore the surprising rise of U.S. progressives in the fight to prevent Trumpism from taking over America. For me, the journey began in January last year. Donald Trump's thuggish attempt at a coup is bad enough. But the support he got and retains from the Republican Party and its voters after his unprecedented assault is genuinely threatening.
Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about.
Another surprise followed when the traditional Democratic leadership passed a $1.9 trillion rescue plan. It acknowledged its alliance with the left.
And I want to say to Bernie, stepping up and making the case why this was so transformational made a big difference in how a lot of people voted.
For since the end of the 70s, the Democratic left has been crushed in my own country, the UK, and in the US, first by President Reagan and Prime Minister Thatcher, and then by the parties of the working class, led by Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, who embraced the supremacy of the market. Today, in the USA, this legacy is being challenged by a new Democratic left that is connected and strategic.
The outer membership, meaning the people that are on emails, is, believe it or not, 8 million. It's very large. Right. But the inner circle, which is the people who donate $5 a month, things like that, right, and are active in physical ways, not just online, is probably 200,000. In most congressional districts, we would have 7,000 or 8,000 people and as many as 20,000, and that's enough, particularly in a primary, to make a huge difference.
There were about 12 states where there was on the ground very intensive organizing. So you had these state level coalitions, right, that did scenario analysis and planning. I think that was historically unprecedented.
We have 98 members, so we're over 40% of the entire Democratic caucus, and we've continued to grow. And we've put in place more stringent requirements for what it means to be a progressive. We coordinate very closely with our outside groups. We're constantly hearing from them. We have informal and formal meetings where we bring them in. We discuss strategy. We figure out, who needs to be moved in a particular direction.
Strategies are also debated across an extensive media, from new podcasts to venerable magazines. And there's huge support for progressive principles, from Black Lives Matter in 2020 to securing women's rights to choose from today's Supreme Court. But at the moment, progressives are frustrated, impatient, and disheartened at the lack of fight in the White House.
The Democrats could be facing an electoral massacre, and they're asking, well, what did we do wrong? Well, it's obvious what you did wrong. You passed the popular American Rescue Plan, you let it run out, you let the child tax credit run out, a super popular program. I could go through the list of programs that expired, and people are still hurting, and they're pissed off.
I speak with a number of people every day who are quite upset with the current administration. The current administration is in office because of the mobilization of Black and brown people across this country, people who stood in line for hours and hours on end, stayed in those lines, voted, and ensured that we'd have a Democratic president in office today.
You can't just have words all the time. And too many Democrats run on words and then there's no results. Why can't we forgive at least $10,000 of student debt? The president could do that. Why can't we stop new drilling in federal lands? He's given more permits on new drilling than Trump did. And this list goes on and on and on. And so people are, including me, incredibly frustrated.
Many progressives are haunted by the trauma of putting their hopes in one man, President Obama, and the defeats that followed.
I think a lot of them congratulate themselves because they'll say, well, I voted for black people before. I voted for Barack Obama. I work with a black person. I've invited black people over to my home. Hey, Tope, we're having a drink right now, and you're black, and I love you, and you love me, right? So I think there is a kind of, a lot of people have in their minds a difference between personal interaction and the kind of systemic issues that bedevil this country.
I was hugely excited about the election of Obama in 2008. Many people who voted for change in that Obama 2008 election became very disillusioned. And that disillusionment led to the Tea Party election of 2010 and ultimately led to the Trump presidency.
Obama would say, if he was sitting here, Larry, we passed, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. And I would say, yes.
Who you work with Obama?
Yeah, very closely. But I would say, yes, and I love you dearly, but it's not working. Working class people, who I've represented and worked with my whole life, are still getting screwed on health care.
Today, US progressives are fighting on two fronts, the foremost of which is Trump's growing challenge.
Are we going to have authoritarianism dominate the entire planet, region to region? We are very naive about authoritarianism, we Americans, and we need to learn from the experiences of other countries.
We unite to fight the fascists that are now taking over the Republican Party. And they're fascists in a technical way, I mean that.
This is the moment where we see exactly what the destination of right-wing authoritarian politics is. It is war and it's fascism. Democracy is under siege all over the world. That the gangster, kleptocrats, autocrats, bullies, tyrants, dictators, despots, they've all found each other, with Putin in Russia and Trump in America and Orban in Hungary and El-Sisi in Egypt and Duterte in the Philippines and Bolsonaro in Brazil and the homicidal crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and President Xi in China. All of them, they've all found each other and they really want to destroy democracy on earth. So the people of Ukraine are on the front lines of trying to defend democracy against the autocrats. Trump is obviously on Putin's side and praising his genius and his savvy. January 6th is Donald Trump's Ukraine, and Ukraine is Vladimir Putin's January the 6th.
At the same time, there is an older, familiar opponent.
Corporate consultants, wealthy donors, definitely the 1% of the 1%, that while Democrats talk and in some ways believe in getting big money out of politics, they're totally addicted to big money.
Many of us do not take corporate PAC money, but many Democrats do. Many of us want, 98% probably want prescription drug pricing reform, but there's a small percentage that don't.
I represent the heart of Silicon Valley. You have Apple, Google, Intel, Yahoo, Cisco, LinkedIn, Tesla, all in my district. The market cap of the area is around $11 trillion, probably the most wealth generated in any place in human history. I often say, tax the billionaires in my district.
I also know how powerful the corporate wing of the Democratic Party is. We have to understand how much the forces of the corporate status quo, how much power they still have, and how they will wield that power up until the end to try to prevent real systemic change from happening.
So what kind of politics is US progressive politics? It's not a socialist politics.
No.
I would not describe it as socialist.
We also have a set of flagship bills, things like Medicare for all, college for all, core principles of this is what it means to be a progressive, and here's what it looks like in legislation.
I call myself a progressive capitalist, which means the Progressive Caucus stands for some very basic principles. Everyone should have health care, universal health care, Medicare for all. Everyone should have free college. People should have the opportunity to flourish and have transactions and express themselves apart from the collective will. So there is value in markets, in exchange, in entrepreneurship, in innovation. But the missing part was a lack of focus on place. We can't just have unfettered markets where you have concentration of economic activity in few geographies, as has happened in the United States, without any government intervention in what's going to happen to rural America, to black and brown America.
Have you said to Tim Cook or to the great figures of these huge internet companies, I want democracy to be in charge of capitalism?
Yes, I mean, I don't know if I put it that way, but Tim Cook will say, well, we're building privacy settings into the new Apple phone. Why aren't you acting in Congress? You ought to be passing the Internet Bill of Rights.
So you would like to see the democracy, so to speak, take command of capitalism rather than the other way around?
It's got to be that way. And so we're either going to have, a democratic and, demonopolized capitalism, or in truth, with Donald Trump and those guys, we're going to have gangster crony capitalism.
Well, I'd like a new term for inside and outside because
Yes.
because I'm an organizer, whether I was on the outside or on the inside, and I think that is the thing that those relationships and that ability to, even when we develop legislation, my perspective on it is let's do it with our outside partners, because you can draft a piece of legislation. It may be the best piece of legislation ever, but if people outside aren't invested in it, don't know about it, aren't going to help you, build the energy and momentum around it, it's not going to go anywhere.
US progressives are evolving into a new and young political species. They are not classic liberals, nor are they paternalistic, top-down social democrats. One thing is very distinctive about them, which is how they grasp the big picture and the links between the issues that they care about. Above all, between race and democracy.
We know that voter suppression exists across this country. We were able to mitigate it in part in 2020, but we already see state legislatures led by Republicans seeking to reinforce and to renew past practices, because they see that when more people can vote, regardless of party, that when more people vote, they may not win.
I don't think they're racist in the sense that they, if they see me, they'll call me the N-word or something like that. So there's not a kind of explicit racism. Do they believe in a kind of system that has benefited them at the expense of lots of other people? Yes, they do. Is that system racist? I believe it is.
The media is seen as a structural part of the power system.
99% of politics is the rich and corporate interests essentially stealing from everybody else. But less than 1% of corporate media coverage is about that topic.
The Constitution itself is central.
We didn't start off as a democracy. We started off as a slave republic of white male property owners, but it's been through successive waves of social and political struggle that we've opened America up. Democracy in America is always either shrinking and shriveling away, or it's expanding and growing. And we just got to get back on the growth track, including by admitting some new states to the Union. Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, we got millions of people who are disenfranchised and not represented in Congress.
The environment demands bold public investment.
The biggest impetus long term is to not be dependent on petrostates. When you're looking at Russia and the dependence on oil, and that's degradation of democracy and human rights. When you look at the Saudis and the brutal bombing in Yemen, when you look at Venezuela and Maduro's repression of his own people, what is a common thread? It is petrostates. And how do we get away from that? How do we affirm democracy? We need a moonshot in renewable energy, in climate policy.
After Sunrise really put the Green New Deal on the table, the challenge was to translate that into real legislation. It's pathological climate denial.
The awesome yet intimate powers of the internet must be confronted.
The digital space is transformative in two ways, economically and politically. Economically, 25 million digital jobs in the United States by 2025. These aren't just coding for Google or Facebook. These are the new manufacturing jobs, retail jobs, the new healthcare jobs. So how do we democratize access to that? And then in the public sphere, this is where so much political conversation is taking place. How many people wake up and see Twitter or Facebook to understand what's happening in Ukraine as opposed to tuning into BBC or CNN? And what the Internet Bill of Rights says is we have to have some control in shaping the public sphere.
We need new fundamental rights, the rights to know our own lives, our own experience, and to decide what is shared, with whom, to what purpose, how. We need public institutions that exist under the rule of democratic law, but it's not the same as the state, and it's certainly not the market.
Traditional battles on the economy and employment are taking on a new connectedness.
What we are seeing now, in this very unusual moment in American history, are working people from coast to coast standing up and saying, you know what, something is wrong here. The billionaire class during this pandemic have made out like bandits. Their wealth is increasing exponentially, while working people are falling further and further behind. And people are saying, enough is enough. We're gonna organize, we're gonna form unions, we're gonna collectively bargain. And I think that is enormously important for our economy and for our entire country. To his credit, Biden has talked more about unions than any other president in my lifetime, but talk is not enough.
Systemic corruption is a #1 enemy.
I have a significant bill with Elizabeth Warren, an anti-corruption bill. It's an extensive anti-corruption bill.
So this is
going out.
legal corruption, so to speak.
It's all kinds.
And when you see a government that works great for those with money and connections and doesn't work for much of anyone else, that's corruption, plain and simple, and we need to call it out for what it is. Corruption has put our planet at risk. Corruption has broken our economy, and corruption is breaking our democracy.
But progressives don't yet have a clear American story.
One of the reasons why Trump was so successful, he was a walking narrative, right, of success that a lot of people identified with and connected to. I know a lot of people on the left are allergic to that or just kind of dismiss it out of hand. But I think that there are a number of people who are kind of waiting for an invocation of faith as we talk about some of the grand challenges we face. I mean, if there's one thing that religion and faith do really well, it's the grand story about human history, about who we are, where we've come from.
At the heart of the Progressive Project is democracy itself.
We have a tightrope to walk because we have to defend the Constitution, including all of the rickety and obsolete parts of it, like the Electoral College, which is an absolute undemocratic relic of the 18th century. We got to defend the voting system as it exists at the same time that we're trying to reform and transform it as we move forward. But we are the vast majority in the country, but what they've got is a bag of tricks, and those tricks are all anti-democratic levers of power. And one of them is the Electoral College, which is in the Constitution. Most of them are not in the Constitution. The gerrymandering of our congressional districts, which allows political minorities in the states to subdue electoral majorities in the states. The packing of our courts by the right wing corporate dark money, and so on. That's what we're up against.
The rules go on and on and on here. Democracy itself is actually the leading issue, and we do surveys all the time to engage our members. The leading issue is democracy, healthcare, climate crisis, racial justice. Without a better democracy, we won't have the healthcare. We won't solve the climate crisis. We won't deal with racial justice. We won't deal with the inequality of wealth.
I am somewhat encouraged that there have been more primaries of late, more contested primaries. I am a huge believer that contested primaries are very good for democracy, that the lack of contested primaries is at the root of a lot of these problems.
My theory of change is that you can use elected office for organizing. And you can get more of us who are organizers and organize the power inside as well. People say, oh, progressives, you can't get anything done because politics is the art of the possible. I always say, well, if politics is the art of the possible, then it's up to us as organizers, wherever we sit, to move the boundaries of what is seen as possible.
Can progressives shift the boundaries of the possible? Given the historic defeat of the left, perhaps we should first ask, how come they're even strong enough to mount such a challenge? In taking control, I suggest that below the huge incoming tide of marketization, countercurrents of humanization always resisted it. Feminism, environmentalism, anti-racism, and demands for basic rights were all part of this. So too is the transformation of health and bodily awareness, recently redoubled by COVID. Also, digital technology has broken the media monopoly. It would have been impossible to make a film like this 25 years ago, and it makes active participation feasible. But if the contest in America was simply about democracy, I show that recent history tells us the progressives will lose. But the climate crisis demands popular agency as well as far-sighted good government. So too does meeting the pressures of the need to compete with China, while the horrors of the authoritarian alternative now being enacted by Putin in Ukraine show us the price of failure. It's a complete contrast to the era when we were told there is no alternative to market domination and that government is the problem. Here's the twist though, it was Trump who first shattered fatalism and made voting count. Now, the old, often corrupt, liberal centre can't force us back into passive acquiescence. Perhaps it is true to say that the Civil War never really went away in the United States, and the consequence of Trump's recklessness is that now it must be resolved. Will the nationalist authoritarians or the multiracial Democrats be the victors? The US, and therefore the world, is on a knife edge. Either progressives change America for good, or Trumpism will. My visit to Washington confirms that provided the centre allies with progressives, they have the capacity and the abilities to succeed.
I believe these problems can be fixed. I believe that change can happen very quickly. It can happen at exponential speed.
They're quite terrified of a progressive left that is organized, that is disciplined in messaging, and that is actually putting forward real truths about why neoliberal economic policies don't work and why we need to change them.
And is clearly capable of governing.
Yes, and is clearly capable of governing.